And hello to anyone who is watching this recording after the fact. We're delighted to know you're following along. And let us pray, and we'll pray for John's volume. In addition, we will pray, God of hope, from you come every blessing and all peace. Show us that in the midst of our struggles, you are with us. Give us the abundance of your grace, that we may do the work you give us to do, and that we may be for the world a sign of your presence. Through Christ, the way and the truth. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So I just wanted to very quickly remind us of where we are. I showed this last week. We talked last time about how Matthew was kind of divided into 5 big chunks with a prologue and an epilogue. And we talked about how that may be analogous. Some people have said that it's meant to be analogous to the 5 books of Torah, depending on how much you want to press that point. But we are now in book 5, that last push, that last major section of the gospel before the resurrection. And then when we ask ourselves, where in the world is Jesus? Right now, does anyone remember where we are geographically in the story?
It's heading towards Jerusalem, if I remember correctly.
You do indeed remember correctly.
And he's east of the Jordan now, right? In
Yes.
that purple area?
Yep, exactly. So somewhere in here, heading toward Jerusalem, not going down through Samaria where he's been rejected, but going down here. And this is primarily a Jewish area. So that is where we are as we move into chapter 20 of Matthew's Gospel. And I'm really eager to hear your thoughts about this parable. In a amazing, you can call it a coincidence, you can call it a God incidence. This parable that we are about to read is actually the gospel for this coming Sunday. Now, if I had tried to schedule it that way, it never would have worked. But here we are, 35 weeks in to our discussion of Matthew. It's literally our 35th session. I keep track of that for reasons I don't really understand, but I do it for my own. And so here we are. So this parable this is a goodie. I mean, they're all good, but this one's juicy. So we could probably spend the whole time on this. Hopefully we'll move beyond it, but if we don't, that's okay too. Would anybody like to read this parable? So Matthew 21 through 16 for us.
Sure.
Thank you, Fred. And before you start, John, any luck?
I'm on, I think, if you could hear me.
We can hear you.
We can
Okay.
hear you. Yay. Oh, I'm so glad. Good news. Okay, over to you, Fred.
Okay. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing around here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going out to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and You have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, my friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.
You, Fred. Hey, Kim.
Hi, guys. Good morning. I'm sorry I'm late.
You never have to apologize. Glad you.
Email.
We know how that goes. We are starting it slowly today, so you're not missing anything. So, except where Ellie and Bob are. So we'll have that.
Oh,
the
oh
end.
yes.
So have at it. Where do you want to go with this parable?
If I can jump in, it's Mark. The thing that sets me off a little bit is not so much the unfairness of giving more to one than to the other, even though they I mean the same to both, even though they work different times. It's the claim to absolute power to make that decision. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me?
It's a point.
That is what begins to make me feel as though there's something not right. He could have said, well, I could have decided to pay them nothing at all, right? I mean, I'm God. And that assertion of absolute power sets my teeth on edge a little bit. Not the injustice between the two sets of workers.
Great.
Well,
I
I always thought of it though as absolute grace, that I have, I am the one who can dispense grace. And the fact that you have been my follower for 50 years and done everything great, and this guy here just saw the light and came, you both get it. So I see it in a different way, Mark.
I can see both sides. I really see, but I can see how he feels that he has the right with his money. But money is power. So I can see that point. But this to me is communism versus capitalism. And capitalism is human nature. And that is why they don't like it, because it doesn't feel fair to be sort of like cast in one group. You're grade 15 and everybody in grade 15 gets the same when there's striations within grade 15 of how hard you work, or, and so to me, it's that battle of human nature.
Yeah, it's funny. I look at this as, in a way, unbridled capitalism. I mean, the boss gets to decide no matter what, right?
No, I think it's a manifestation of the abundance of God, that there is enough for everybody.
That's a very good one.
I look at this just the way I look at the prodigal son, when the other son comes in and says, you can't give him back his place. You can't give him, we got to give him noogies or hazing or something. We can't just let him walk in here.
Well, they have to earn. They have to earn. It's like
it's there for the taking. It's not, it's an attitude thing more than an earned thing. And it's there. And all you have to do is walk in and accept the abundance.
It's interesting that that when you look at I'm seeing two groups here. One's saying this is totally not fair, and the other is saying this is absolutely right. But the problem is the your metaphor here. I mean, the problem is that the story is set in a very practical day-to-day life thing, and I think it's an example, and I think, I don't know, maybe Jesus is just trying to tease us a little bit, but practically speaking, these people have earned money, and that's what they live by. It's a personal damage if you are not paid what you believe that you have earned. On the other hand, when we are talking about, I mean, if this really is, this is God and God's grace and that sort of thing, and the guy who gets absolution on his deathbed, going to heaven as well as, you know, Machiavelli, that is something that A, we can't question, and B, it doesn't damage us. So it's, you can't take it personally. Whereas this simile here is a much more practical and earthbound challenge that we face from a personal livelihood, you know, on earth kind of approach.
I think that the fact that they've agreed to the rate is one thing. It's that it diminishes their efforts when he gives it to somebody else for less money. And just coming from a human resources standpoint, he doesn't have to be public with his pay to everybody. He doesn't have to stand some guy. I mean, he must have known that this would bother people. I don't know.
I'm glad you said that, Kim. I'm very glad you.
But should it bother you?
Before we answer that question, let me just quickly say hi, Marietta. Glad you're here.
Hello, Marietta.
I have a hard time getting in.
But you made it, and I'm so glad. We are delighted to see you. So, yay. So Kim said, you know, shouldn't the landowner have known that it would bug people? You know, we don't typically post, I mean, I guess in the government you do, but otherwise, typically you don't post everybody's salaries, because what does that do? It leads to resentment and disagreement and comparison. So Kim made a point about, wouldn't he have known that? Fred asked the question, you know, but should it bother us? So what do y'all think?
I think we're humans, and it bothers us to feel that other people do as much as we do and get, you know, 3 times more recognition, whether it's being thanked or whatever. If your husband ran around and did the same thing for your boys that you would normally do, let's say you both work full-time jobs, and they only thanked your husband, or they thanked him 3 times, or they brought him flowers to thank him, and they never did it to you. It's just that incongruence. It's not that it's not the landowner's right. He can do whatever he wants, but he is going to see sow this, like you said, Patty, anger, resentment, comparison. I mean, this is human
that
nature.
part of the lesson, that you shouldn't be judging yourself based on other people.
Yeah. And he shouldn't be power hungry. You know, I don't know.
That this is, you know, that envy and, you know, this is what you're supposed to be putting aside to follow Jesus. And when the disciples ask him, you know, who's going to sit on your right hand and who on your left? You know, and he says, that's the wrong question.
And that question's coming, so stay tuned.
I like the way Ellie put it, that it doesn't matter when we accept God in our lives, we get the same reward. I like that.
And, you know, you can carry that a little bit further, which is not done in this parable, but is virtue its own reward? Is following Jesus, you know, working in his vineyard, its own reward, so that you have gotten more out of your life than the person who only came in, you know, at sunset?
Good question.
And that's where the discrepancy becomes difficult. And if you have been out in the hot sun working in a vineyard for all day, and somebody comes in, it's a very much more physical, earthly question, and to try to use a physical, earthly example to illustrate something that is by definition not earthly, it sets you up for a lot of argument.
You know, it's funny. I think I would like the message that the grace of God is given to people no matter when uh, they accept him. I mean, early in life, late in life, on your deathbed, whatever. Everybody gets the same reward. I think that's the right answer, and I don't like this envious stuff. Well, I was good all my life, and he was a sinner all his life, so he should be punished. I don't like. I think that's the right answer. What I
I
would,
feel that way about everybody but Hitler. I
okay, there
feel
you
like
go.
he shouldn't get a pass on his deathbed. That's me.
We all have our own favorite exceptions. I can mention a few myself.
You can
But
mention a
I
few.
like that as a principle. But what I don't like is this claim of absolute authority to make that choice. And I mean, God is saying, I'm a dictator. I may be a benevolent dictator, but I'm the dictator. And suppose I decided differently. Suppose I said, oh no, if you haven't been good all your life, then you get to suffer a lot. And maybe not even get into heaven at all. I mean, it's that claim of benevolent dictatorship that makes me feel that this is the wrong message. If you had left that
Well,
sentence out, I would have been fine.
except what he agreed to do was to give them a denarius, which is their daily bread.
Yes.
And that's what we all pray for. Give us our daily bread.
Thank you, John.
Even if we didn't earn it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
do you want those people? And my starting sticking point is, when he goes over at 5 o'clock and he says, well, no one has hired us. He was there at the early in the morning. Those guys were just sleeping in and having a nice breakfast or something. They obviously weren't at the marketplace. They weren't hanging out at the Home Depot right at the opening to get a job. So there is that. But and I look at it too. Maybe but he's using work, but there's also living your life. And I have spent all day biking across the desert in Arizona when I could have taken a ride in the van. The van was there every 20 miles saying, do you want to ride? But there's more satisfaction for me in that I didn't take the van. So it may be that the part of it is the people who didn't take the van feel, who worked in the vineyard are supposed to have more satisfaction in the course of their lives than the people who just sat around.
I want to
introduce
to something you said earlier, Fred, when you compared this to the prodigal son. And I think that's right. I think we hear basically the same stakes, right? Those who did the right thing, did expected, yada, 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 versus the Johnny come latelys. And so this is the sticking point for a lot of us, right? Is what do we do with that?
Not fair.
It's not fair. It's not fair.
My kids used to come up to me, occasionally and with some complaint, and it would end with, and it's not fair.
Exactly.
And, I started, whenever they did that, I say, life isn't fair and you're a big winner. So why are you complaining? They didn't like it. I find it's very easy for me to be philosophical when the injustice is visited on somebody else.
Somebody else.
Yeah. When it's visited on me, I am outraged.
You're right.
But I recognize that as being an Oh, Ray's not here. I can say if you're a Buddhist, you would call that being unskillful.
When Ray watches it later, he'll get a good chuckle out of that.
I mean, it's unskillful to be unhappy because someone else has more or got more, or his toast fell on the unbuttered side and yours fell on the buttered side.
Yeah. I think all of our points are good because there really are two sides to this story,
At least.
But
I-
it doesn't make it easy for the people who worked all day in the sun.
No,
Well, and it makes it even harder for me because I've explained that I think it's, everybody should get the same. That means the last will be first, etc. But we just in our last session, we ended with the last shall be first and the first shall be
yes,
last. And there I was interpreting it as, oh, the rich man, he's got his rewards on earth. And those who are poor now will get their rewards in heaven. And they don't go together.
they don't.
I can't put them together when, yet it's the same phrase ends each of them.
I'm so glad. Thank you. Thank you for backing up and looking at that big picture. I wanted to say something about last time too, when Fred, I think it was you who was talking about, the agitation and what that does to the person. And then last time we talked about the whole question about forgiveness, and we said, who suffers when we refuse to forgive? Ultimately, we ourselves do. So there's this tension I'm beginning, and I hadn't thought about it before. So this is a truly unformed thought. Watch out. But there's something I think going on here about what's happening to your soul as you are navigating in the world and choosing how to relate to other people, holding a grudge, being resentful, getting angry or envious because someone else's toast fell on the buttered side up and yours fell on the buttered side down. There's something personally, transformationally at stake, I think, here as well. What do you think? So this story, this chapter begins with, for the kingdom of heaven is like, and Ellie reminded us, good English major, that this is a simile, right? It's a comparison using like or as. What is the kingdom of heaven like according to this? If you were to paint a picture of the kingdom of heaven, if this were the only snapshot you got of the kingdom of heaven, what would you glean?
You can take your time over breakfast and still get paid.
It's very unfair.
Everything
Yeah.
is the same. Everything is the same. That's what I think.
Curiously, we have observed that, or at least when we were traveling behind the Iron Curtain before it fell, the workmanship was incredibly shoddy. The buildings were ugly that were built post-war. We would pass something that was already starting to crumble because the cement hadn't been made right. So if you are not paid what you think you are worth, you don't do good work. This is a human thing, not a God thing.
Ah,
So,
excellent.
They
so
were paid
necessarily.
what they thought they were worth.
Well, they were paid whether they did the work or not.
Well, they were paid. They didn't know what was going on. They were paid the agreed wage, and that, as I understand it, 1 denarius per day was kind of a standard.
Yeah, that was
pay.
the day's wage. Yep.
Oh, right, yeah, no.
That was the normal day's wage if you were a laborer.
The daily bread, as John said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Literally.
let's look at it the other way. Suppose he had paid them all, and the ones who came last went up and or the ones who came first went up and congratulated the ones who came last and said, "Boy, you guys really lucked out. I'm so happy your family gets to eat today. And by the way, you're buying the first beer at the pub." That would have been another entirely different way, to be glad for somebody else's good fortune.
Fascinating.
And
Great.
which one is a more rewarding way to live?
Well, it depends on whether he pays for the pub.
So let's push this a little further though. According to Jesus, what is so, it begins with 4, which makes it sound like, and bearing in mind, the editorial process here, but, Peter has just said to Jesus at the end of 19, look, we've left everything, we've followed you. And Jesus says, at the renewal of all things, we talked last time about new creation, the eschaton, the second coming. When the Son of Man is seated at the throne, on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who's left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields will receive 100-fold and will inherit eternal life. But many will be first, who are first will be last, and the last will be first. For,
Yeah.
this continues, for the kingdom of heaven. So it makes it sound like that's a continuation, right? That there's a segue there. How does this story tie, or does it? How does this parable tie back to that exchange with Peter, do you think?
Clearly the disciples are the ones that got hired at 6 in the morning and worked all day. And I think he's warning them not to be bitter against the people who find God last.
But the people who truly find God, I feel like, have something in their heart where they're the same, right? So at that point, they're the same. Whereas working, this is more like a concrete sort of thing where they didn't do the same, right? I don't
That
know.
was my argument about this whole story. There's 2 different bases of looking at it, and
Right.
Fairness is one thing when it comes to feeding your kids with your denarius, and it's quite another thing when you're talking about grace, which, as John says, comes to everybody, and it shouldn't matter to you whether somebody, that's not your business, whether somebody else got grace on his deathbed.
Well,
It's probably not our business what other people get paid either, but this guy made
Yeah,
it
well,
everybody's business.
Actually,
it-
that's a United States attitude. I think it's Finland. They release all the tax records every year. So you can look and see what your neighbor made. It's, this is a societal decision we have made, but it's not the only one that's possible.
And
I used to work for Accenture, and they're moving toward a model because they said that this hiding what people get paid, it masks unfairness. And they said they want it to be that, not that everybody's talking about it, but if you were standing at the water cooler and we all asked each other what we made, that if everybody said, it would be completely fair because it would be based on experience, seniority, and what this person's doing, amount of
See,
travel.
that's a problem I have is it's innate in people to want fairness.
Yes,
But
it
I
is.
have not seen that there is fairness in the world or that God enforces fairness in the world. Now, this idea that you're going to get paid after you die is something that I think the message of Jesus, and I'm informing this with other spiritual traditions. The message of Jesus is the kingdom of heaven is now. The reward is now. If you live a good life and take pride and take pleasure in virtue and all that, you don't have to worry about somebody else getting squashed after they're dead. And I'm sorry, but I feel like this was added. This thought was added on by people who were selling Christianity, as eternal life, just like they were selling eternal life. I'm not sure that this was Jesus's message. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not, but that's my own personal bias.
Mark, you were going to say something a minute ago.
Yeah, so connecting back up to the previous discussion with Peter, where he's saying, you guys are going to be following me and doing all the dirty work, but it'll all work out at the end. And I think the next part of the story is really designed to send a message to them, in case they are inclined to say, well, wait a minute, we're going to be with you all this time, we're going to do all this work, and then we're all going to be happy in heaven together equally.
Hmm.
And Jesus is saying, it's going to be very human at that point to say that's not fair. I mean, we all have this instinct that it isn't fair to have that equal reward for different amounts of work. But his message really is, if you feel that, I get it, but you haven't really gotten the message if you insist on that. You shouldn't be indifferent to the welfare of other people and their success in achieving salvation. You should rejoice in it. It shouldn't be a matter where you're envious of them, or that you think they shouldn't have gotten that, or that you don't care one way or the other. Your job is to try to do what you can to bring them to salvation. And if that works, you shouldn't complain that you had to do all the work to get them there. So that's how I would try to connect it to the two passages.
There, I think that's
Right.
very helpful, Mark. And
Well, except in the prior passage, those 12 get to sit on thrones
Yeah.
and judge the tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good point.
So-
Good point. Yeah. They get a benefit that the other people don't. Yeah.
Yeah, and what if they said the new person can come and judge, when he hasn't been a disciple, and you're whatever. We'll see.
hold that thought as to whether it's a benefit. So I want to just a good point, Mark. But I do think that what you just said, Mark, ties back to what Fred was talking about before. Does anybody here say, hey, good on you? I'm so glad that you finally got hired and that you got, that you can feed your family tonight. Human nature doesn't seem to work that way. And which is fascinating, because if we, read this from a God's eye perspective, what is it we're supposed to take away? For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner. So tell me more about the kingdom of heaven according to this. What is Jesus saying about the kingdom of heaven? What does it say about God? Maybe I'll ask it that way.
Think about two brothers, Patty, who one got hired at the first and one got hired at the last.
Mm-hmm.
Would the brother who was hired first, be bitching and moaning, or would he go up to his brother and say, boy, I'm glad you lucked into a good deal. I'm so happy for you.
Can I tell you about brothers in my house? And I know what I'd like them to say.
I mean,
While we're on this, I was like George Will's characterization of fair as a 4-letter F word. That
Love that. Oh, I really like that a lot, John. What does this say about God?
Well, something we always knew, and that is that he makes his own rules.
Mm-hmm.
well, like I say, there's an abundance. We are used to an economy of scarcity. God's economy is abundance.
And yet
all are forgiven.
yeah. The landowner knows, going back to Kim's earlier point, the landowner has to know that by announcing the pay, it's going to cause trouble. And, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's all right. Because that resentment is a human issue. That's not a God thing, right? That's our problem. If we start comparing ourselves and getting resentful and thinking, it's interesting to me because it says after agreeing with the laborers for a denarius for the day. So, the early birds got exactly what they were promised. They weren't slighted at all. They got their daily bread.
Mm-hmm.
and the later people, the second group, he said, you go out too and I'll pay you whatever is right.
Mm-hmm.
A little ambiguous there.
Exactly. What does that mean?
Yeah.
That contract wouldn't hold up, right?
Does the landowner or God have more to pay? Could he have given them a raise or, something? Did he have anything extra?
Good question.
I like Amy's summary.
Oh, good.
The issue for the first hired is what they consider fair. For the owner, the issue is what he considers right.
Ha.
That doesn't help you, Fred, but it's somebody
Well,
else's opinion.
no, but I mean, it's a matter of if you get your full wage, and in this case, it's grace or salvation or happiness or whatever you want to call it. Is there anything left that you could have gotten?
Good question.
I think the assumption here is that the landowner is infinitely wealthy. Just that there isn't a question of whether he's trying to divide what he has among his workers. It's just that he is able to give them anything that he wants.
He's not King Lear, right? He doesn't have a circumscribed amount and trying to divvy it up. And look what happens in Lear. That whole question of fairness.
Makes you glad God only had one child.
Not 3 daughters. Yeah, anything else here? Let me just ask this. Is the landowner God?
No.
Yes.
The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner.
Okay,
I don't think you
that's
can avoid.
okay.
I don't think you can avoid that.
But
It's
what?
not like the widow imploring the judge and wondering who is the judge and who is the widow.
Right. And
Mhm.
if the landowner is God, what is that suggesting? If God knowingly causes this dissension, this resentment, going back to the before, does that bother? I mean, going back to what Mark said at the very beginning about the power, and am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me?
Patty, you know what? Part of it's framing, right? So if in some way this landowner came in, like I came in at Marriott or something and said, hey, at the last minute, I am going to hire this group to help you guys. I'm going to get you out of here faster. I've got to pay him the same thing to do it. But just think, you're going to go home earlier because I'm going to have 10 extra hands here. We're going to get this done. Let's just pretend. So, and that's what the Bible is, right? Like we try to interpret it so that we see and have this like level of understanding. Whereas this guy doesn't do that, right? He just lays it out there, just sort of like
the landowner.
Yeah, by the landowner. Like he doesn't frame it. Why not frame it in a way like, hey, think about it this way. You're getting to go home probably a whole hour earlier because I've got these extra hands for you. This is fantastic. Go
Well,
home and
get a
have
profit
dinner.
from it.
I mean, it's just I think yes, I do think that it is supposed to be like the kingdom of heaven and he's supposed to be like God, but he's not very, I don't know, loving in his explanation. Like when you are as a parent and the first time your child says, I don't want to pick up those socks. Those are Spencer's socks. And you say, well, honey, sometimes I pick up your socks. They're not my socks. There's none of that. There's no, like, the teaching is not compassionate,
That's really good. There's not. It's very legalistic. Hey, you made a contract. What do you got to complain about, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think God does not feel it necessary to spin.
Yeah, but it could be nicer than a boss insisting on the terms of a contract. I mean, that's a little rude.
Well, I'm going to suggest we hold that thought. And I'd love to see us get through 28 because this next story ties in so much so strongly with the story, the parable we just read. So I would hate to push that to next week because we might lose the plot. Would somebody like to read these 3 paragraphs for us?
Okay.
Sally?
Let's see. So while Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves and said to them on the way, "Look, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and on the 3rd day he will be raised." Then, and we're totally changing the subject. Then the mother of the sons, then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked a favor of him. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Declare that these 2 sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." But Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink?" And they said to him, "We're able." And he said to them, "You will indeed drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left, this is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard it, they were angry with the 2 brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you, but whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many."
Silly. So now they're on the road up to Jerusalem. We're getting closer and closer to the cross. This is the 3rd time Jesus has told them what's going to happen. Right? Remember, we're now post-transfiguration, and we've talked a little bit about, the transfiguration was a moment where the disciples got a glimpse of Jesus in his glory. And what are they going to do about that? They've had this preview of coming attractions. Has that changed the way they live in the world? And we read the one commentator who said, after the transfiguration, they're supposed to have 1 foot in the old world and 1 foot in the new world. Well, what do you think? And this story, especially of James and John, ties so closely to the landowner and the laborers. What do you hear?
Yeah, except the difference is that in this one, God seems to be defending inequality instead of equality. And this goes back to the thing that John was talking about. The 12 will sit in judgment over the tribes of Israel. So this does seem to push against the equality message from the previous story about the landowner.
Well, and you mentioned it being a benefit to sit with Jesus. And I said, well, hold that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because Jesus says to Mama Bear here, Mama Zebedee, Mrs. Zebedee, you don't know what you're asking. So, how does this connect with what's just come before? So, Jesus has been telling them over and over again that, it's not, you've seen the preview of coming attractions and you've got this image of, sitting on the clouds with your bonbons, but you're forgetting about what's coming in between. And we're on our way there.
Mm-hmm.
And so this question about power and reward and righteousness and fill in the blank. Yeah, it's more complicated. And of course, then the humans being humans, the other 10 get jealous and get angry at James and John. As the mother of sons, I love the fact that she goes in and she says, listen, this is what I want. And, the sons are just kind of sitting there. But again, human nature.
She has her favorites.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, also, I think, and there again, the disciples are just being human again. They've seen the transfiguration. They've seen the fireworks. This is going to be really, really wonderful. And this whole intervening part, as you say, of being mocked and flogged and crucified and dying, that's not penetrating yet. I mean, there's going to be the wonderful clouds of glory, and okay, and that's not exactly sure how we're getting there, but I mean, this crucified thing, you know, they're going to kill you. No, they're
Could
going
happen
to.
to anybody.
Do you want to be killed also, like me? Because that is what you're going to have to go through in order to get your clouds.
That cup that I'm about to drink. Yeah. I'm reminded in Jesus Christ Superstar, I think I've mentioned this before, the moment, the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus sings this monologue, struggling about whether to go forward or not. And then the culmination, the climax is, I will drink your cup of poison, which just goes through me every time I hear that.
Mhm.
And that's really what he's talking about here with Mrs. Zebedee. It's like, okay, this is what it's going to take. And I'm reminded what you were saying, Ellie, of the first time Jesus, back at Caesarea Philippi, when Jesus said, who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And when he told them what was going to happen, and Peter said, say it isn't so, to which Jesus responds,
Get behind me,
Behind me,
Satan.
get
Satan.
behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block. Don't get in the way. And the other thing that, going back again to the end of 19, when Peter says, we've left everything and followed you, what then will we have? That's sort of, going back to what Kim said, that's the framing question, right? What then will we have? And of course, the sons of Zebedee, they were doing the same thing that Peter was doing when they were called, right? They were mending their father's sails in the boat, and Jesus comes along and they leave poor Zebedee behind. They've followed him. What are they going to have? So this is where they're looking, again, the clock is ticking. They're heading toward Jerusalem. So people are starting to ask, okay, what am I going to get out of this? I've been with you for probably 3 years, more or less ish. What am I going to get? What's due
Done
me?
it for me.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, that's sort of the ultimate human question, right?
Well, and that's why I tend to think that Jesus' message was heaven is now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not after you're dead. This is more of a these are more conventional Christianity teachings that regardless of what happens today, your true reward is afterwards.
That's that, when we were reading Mark together, and most of us were together for the Gospel of Mark, and we talked about apocalyptic writing, right? It's like, okay, you're struggling now, but in the afterlife, it's all going to get turned upside down, and don't worry about it because things will be made right. And that's a very comforting idea for people who are struggling now. It gives hope to folks that, okay, when I'm sitting on my clouds, strumming my harp, it's going to be all right. And
Yeah, and it's also one it's a promise you never have to make good on.
right. Yeah.
It's an easy promise to make. Yeah, particularly if you're a salesman.
But Jesus isn't making that promise, right?
Jesus isn't. Jesus is saying, I think Jesus is saying, heaven or, is right now.
The kingdom of
God
heaven
is
is
today.
at hand, right? And he says that over and over again. Yeah, it's breaking.
And they don't get it that, they it's not waiting. It's your attitude and how you're living your life today.
Right. You will be a happier person if you're not worried about how these other people are paid. You will have more fulfillment in life if you have this metamorphosis about these types of issues, for sure.
That transformation I was talking about before. Yeah, you will be happier. You'll experience more joy in life. Yeah, if you're not so petty and spending all your time In other
If you're
people.
happy that that other worker got a full denarius, if you're glad for him, like he was your brother, and you were worried that
Yeah.
his kids might come over and try and eat at your house.
Yeah, or ask you
Yeah.
for money or whatever.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, if you're happy for him, you will be happy. If you're
Right.
mad that he got more than you did, you'll be mad, which is most likely to make, to lead to a happier life.
And not just for yourself, but think about what happens in the larger society if people start actually living that way, rejoicing in someone else's good fortune, sharing what they have. What are the ripple? Yes, it'll make an individual happy, which is great. But Jesus isn't so much talking only about individuals, right? He's interested in transforming the world. The kingdom of heaven is breaking in. And so, what happens in a world where people start to behave that way? What if that caught on? Wow.
So where's the second half of the story then, where the brother who comes in at the last hour hands the brother who's been there all day half a denarius and says, I know you worked harder than me. That's like the second half.
That's still the economy of scarcity.
Indeed.
The brother, is happy for his brother. You've come back. My father is complete again. Our family is complete again. I am, I see this as the best outcome. And admit it, I don't do it all the time.
None of us does, Fred.
I have to admit that I am, really pissed when somebody cuts in front of me in traffic. I don't say, gee, maybe he's has a reason to be in a big hurry, or, I mean, I wish I were the one who had won the $1 billion in Powerball.
Guess what? You're human. And that's the point, I guess, is that we are all bound by our humanity. And Jesus is offering this other vision, and it's going to take some buy-in from us.
But
And
we love others on a, limited basis. You love, your parents. You love your siblings. You love your spouse. The goal is for you to love everybody like that.
Hard to do, but you're right. And think about if that's the vision, right? If that's what we're working toward, isn't that exciting? I mean, it's hard to get to, right? And none of us is able to do it on our own. We talked about this at Vestry last night about how everything we intend to do, we really should add with God's help at the end of that sentence, because we can't do any of this on our own. But what an exciting vision of a world where people actually did rejoice in one another and were legitimately, genuinely, concerned about the needs of others, not at the expense of their own needs, but certainly as part of the picture, understanding them as an extension of themselves. It goes against so much of the way we see the world, because to go back to Fred's point, we're kind of stuck in scarcity so much of the time. And that's not Jesus's worldview or God view.
Well, we see life as a zero-sum game. Whatever is good, whatever happens that's good for somebody else is bad for us.
That's right. If you get the cookie, that means I don't. Yep.
Instead of seeing it as, as we all work together and we grow the pie.
Yeah. And I wonder what it would take for us to make that cognitive shift.
You have to want to. And then you have, then it's meditation, prayer, whatever internal, remaking of your own, basic, urges.
It feels like it would be easier in smaller societies, like you would care about the mental health of somebody in a society if you lived on a farm with 26 people and one person had an issue that affect everyone, right? A ripple effect, and you care deeply for their wellness because you're really able to relate it to you. Whereas in these larger societies, people, like, they don't care about this guy down the road who's depressed, because it doesn't,
They don't
and,
know
and
him.
it's sad. They don't know him. It doesn't affect him. It's so easy to turn, for humans to turn their back on other humans when there's no effect. And I do think that larger societies do that.
But that is the basis of, most spiritual disciplines. It's
Mhm.
basic to divide people into us versus them.
Yeah, I agree.
And the goal is to realize we're all us.
Exactly. I agree with that.
And that yes, exactly. And, if you think about the vows we take at our baptism, right? To seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, to respect the dignity of every human being. These are essential. That's a code, if you will, of what it means to be a Christian. And actually living that is rigorous. And none of us does it perfectly. Absolutely none of us does it perfectly. That's sort of a given. That's baked into our humanity. But to Fred's point about intentionality, and I would add reflection and honesty with ourselves, about where we're falling short, and instead of just giving up, saying, okay, I'm going to work harder on this with God's help. There's a lot in this. And we maybe want to pick up again with James and John and Mrs. Zebedee next time, or at least, launch from there. Because I just feel as though as they are moving closer to Jerusalem, and that's why I started again with where is Jesus? Where are we in the story? As that's getting closer, the stakes are for sure higher. We're moving from philosophical, blessed are the meek, the Sermon on the Mount, which is beautiful language and great teaching, wonderful way to view the world. But now the rubber is really hitting the road, and okay, how are we to live? And time is running out, and what's going to happen to us? And does any of this mean anything? Given, as Peter says, we've left everything and followed you. So stay tuned as we move forward. And again, we're in the midst of chapter 20. So, probably in another 2 months, we'll be done with Matthew. Maybe more.
Good, right before Christmas.
So, we keep thinking about what we want to do. Yeah, it probably will be an Advent. So be thinking about what we want to do next. Again, it's not an urgent decision, but if something strikes you, let's talk about it. All right, dear ones, thank you so much.
Oh, where are the
Thank you.
tuppers? I need to find out where
Oh, wait, hang on. Let me show the picture. I so look forward to Ellie's every Wednesday. There we go. Where are they?
Oh, let's see. Germany? I don't know. October. Does that say Oktoberfest?
It does say Oktoberfest.
Okay, so where in Germany are you? Are you in Munich or?
Yes, yeah.
I love Munich. That's
And you
great.
see, we can all be happy for the Tuppers
Exactly.
rather than feeling like they got something we didn't.
Yes. Are those gingerbread? Are those big gingerbread hearts?
They are. They're it's a cookie.
It looks amazing.
It smells delicious. I don't know if it's edible or not.
Well, I like the guy in his lederhosen too there in the picture.
Exactly.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Maybe you're not supposed to eat it. Maybe you're just supposed to hang it in your closet like a cinnamon broom or something.
I don't know. I might wind up eating it if I miss lunch next time.
Just
Well, Ellie, I am genuinely happy for you, even though I don't get to be in Germany.
Yeah, I'm heading down
I
for
can
my
bring you all back
Oktoberfest
gingerbread.
beer right now.
Okay.
Beer is amazing.
Good
Yes.
for you, John.
Okay,
Right.
bye,
All right,
everybody.
friends.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Patty.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody, see you next week.
Great discussion.